I had 5 uncles who were cabinet makers, did furniture. I grew up in that environment, and it was interesting to hear them talk about quality and simplicity. Simplicity was very important. If you see Danish furniture, it is like this, no frills. To see my uncles take a piece of wood to see how it was made and use it in a particular way was wonderful. I was interested in design, making things, and so it was really architecture or engineering. I had the opportunity to do both. I chose engineering. I joined Arup in '62, and by then the firm was still quite small, less than 300. I certainly remember my first encounter with the company, because I turned up as arranged, 9 o'clock. There's hardly anybody there. And people sort of drifted in, and that was the way they were. I worked with Paul Arm and Bill Smith. They wanted to go into civil engineering, and an obvious way was to do bridges in a way to widen the idea of, as Ove called it, total architecture into total design, but civil engineers who work with architects. The trouble with bridges was that all important bridges were owned by the ministry, and the ministry had their short list of people they entrusted with. It was a closed market. But then they had a competition for a particularly difficult bridge, and we took part in it. And although we didn't win, we became sort of a distinct second. But out of that really came that they said, okay, you want to work with architects, we will give you some aesthetic bridges. And that was how we started. The first 2 bridges were, and I did them simultaneously, was one up in York, across the river Ouse, with an architect in our associates called Ulrik Plesner, another Dane. What was interesting was he never did a drawing. He asked me to draw something, then he would come, and then we would talk about it. He would sketch a little bit and things like that. What he was doing was actually to give me confidence in ideas, in trying them out, and I'm forever grateful to him for that. And the other one was in Chorley Wood. There was a special bridge across a valley with small woods. The whole problem was to construct this very tall and very big bridge without destroying the woods. And with these exciting jobs, it developed quickly. In fact, we very quickly became highways and bridges. And if you get a major highway, you do sort of 100 bridges at a time. And I became a bridge engineer, first and foremost. One of the first architects I worked with in the group was Humphrey Wood. What was exciting about Humphrey was that he was really a landscape architect. And whereas many have this emphasis on looking at a bridge as an object, and let's make it as beautiful as possible, all this, Humphrey didn't start there. He looked at the environment, the whole environment, and what is it we are fitting in there. And that's, I think, everything since then has been about that. We got one later on up in the Highlands in Scotland called Kyle Skew, where a road had been designed by the local government office, and he sort of went straight across. Bridges were straight in those days, you see. That was the way they were. And that meant that you had to make enormous cuttings and destroy the landscape completely. So we were asked to come in and do that, and came up with a curved bridge. I did a bridge with Renzo Piano. It's in Japan, and it's called Ushibuka Bridge. And he and Peter Rice, they had a firm together, were working on it. And Peter asked me to come over to Genoa and sit down and sort of look at this. And so they had sketches for a span. And I said, what did I think? I said, well, I actually would start somewhere else. I would look at the whole seascape and what has it got to do, the bridge, and get a line, get a base developed for that, and then connect it with a couple of islands. Give me a couple of hours and a drawing board. And so I sat down and I do all that up. A very basic scheme with a basic structure. And then Renzo came and he saw that, and I said, well, this is sort of, for starters, what I got to, and he took it, and then he went home. He came next morning, beautiful, beautiful drawings, watercolors, everything, and so on and so forth. He said, my father was a builder, my grandfather was a builder, this is how we would do it in Italy. That was wonderful. But then he, of course, it developed. And then he changed it to steel from concrete. That's fine. But it was what he did at the edges. He opened up the edges and created a way of which light could filter through and create a pattern which would change, and where you had dark and light, and chiaro oscura, as he said, is for the old Renaissance ideas, which you see in the paintings from Caravaggio and so on. And produced a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful bridge. The one which I feel was, well, which I think of as the biggest success and given most satisfaction, has got to be the Øresund Bridge. He had many of the elements that I talked about, with curves and about the landscape, in this case a seascape, but a very particular one where you see it either from the coastlines, you see it from aeroplanes when you fly in and out of Copenhagen or Malmö, you see it from boats, from ships, from ferries, and you see it when you're driving on it. And of course the engineering was very challenging. You get into very special environmental considerations. First of all, there is the problem of ice and the wind. Because of the harsh conditions, we decided that it should be done under sheltered conditions. So the concrete work was done in Malmö, in a special area there, and then picked up by a floating crane, which we called the Swan, and sailed out. That was a very exciting operation in its own right. The steel girders were done in Cadiz, Spain. Completed that, concrete on top, everything, and then sailed on special Dutch barges up through the Bay of Biscay and the Channel and across the North Sea and down. This was special because here you had a job where usually one could sort of walk out and walk around and so on. Here we had to have boats and cars. So we had this great excitement of size. It was the first really big bridge that we did. We won it in competition. It was back home, which was really quite nice. It finished in the year 2000, the year I retired, so it sort of came together.
The winner of this category will now appear before your very eyes. Principal design for the bridge was by Arup and Partners. This was an historic project, and the bridge is an object lesson in aesthetic and deceptively simple engineering design.
What makes a bridge beautiful to you?
I'm an engineer. When I look at a structure, if I can't immediately sort of see the flow of forces, how it works and so on, I start worrying, and I'm always looking for that. That plus a bit of excitement. So it's exciting to do something which comes together and which you feel is right.